You know what really grinds my gears? The Dow Jones Industrial Average.
Dow Jones Industrial Average.
Dow gained 1%.
Dow Jones Industrial Average, which
Average.
When you want to know how a stock market has performed on a given day, instead of going through every stock from A to Z, it is better to look at a so-called market index. A market index is basically a calculated average of stocks designed to reflect the overall or segments of the stock market. Want to know how a certain country's stock market is doing? There's an index for that. Want to know how a certain sector is doing? There's an index for that as well. In the US, the most commonly mentioned indices are the S&P 500, the Nasdaq, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And of these three, one of them sticks out in my opinion. I will explain why you and me should probably ignore the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And I will also talk about what you can look at instead. But first, what is the Dow Jones Industrial Average? So in 1884, a newsletter that was later to become the Wall Street Journal, Charles Dove started to calculate averages for mostly railway stocks. And this became the first stock market index, and it's actually in use still today. It's called the Dow Jones Transportation Average. Shout out to all my DJIA followers in chat.
To this day! To this day!
It was only until 1890s when industrial stocks started to pop up. Think of companies making sugar, tobacco, coal, rubber, etc. And this led to the creation of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. None of the original members from 1896 exist in the index today, but some are still in business, like General Electric, for example. So what's the main issues with this index? Well, it has to do with how it is constructed. Let me explain. First, how does index providers select the stocks to be included in their indices? Well, for the S&P 500, the selection criteria are quantitative rules. If a listed company is profitable, has enough market capitalization, that is the total market value of all of the company's shares, and if they have enough shares, odds are it's going to be included in the S&P 500 eventually.
Been chosen. I go on to a better place.
For the Dow Jones Industrial Average, however, the stocks are selected by a committee, and the selection is not based on quantitative rules at all. They typically look for stocks that has a sustainable growth prospect, has lots of interest from investors, and excellent reputation. So the index only consists of 30 stocks that has been hand-picked by this committee. But the worst part of this index is how it is calculated based on these 30 stocks. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is a so-called price-weighted index, and it's better understood through an example. Let's calculate a price-weighted index with 3 stocks, starting with Nvidia, United Health Group, and Verizon. These 2 stocks will make sense in just a second. Nvidia was trading at $140 a share when I recorded this video. Now, we can calculate our price-weighted index by summing up all of the prices and then divide the sum by 3. Since United Health Group has a stock price that is more than 4 times that of Nvidia, in a price-weighted index, United Health Group's weight is 4 times as large. This means that Nvidia needs to move more than 4% to have as much of an impact on the index as United Health Group would have for only 1% move. A 1% move in United Health Group will have a bigger impact just because of its share price alone. But the stock price in itself does not tell us how large these companies are. Nvidia's market capitalization is huge compared to these other 2 stocks. And if we include more and more stocks, we will have the Dow Jones Industrial Average. But there's no logic to this whatsoever. United Health Group has a 4 times higher weight than Nvidia, even though the market capitalization of Nvidia is 6 times as large. Having the weight to only depend on price is very arbitrary, and it has no underlying economic reasoning. And even though this index is said to include stocks that are of high interest to investors, it doesn't include Tesla or Berkshire Hathaway, for example. Today, most market indices, like the S&P 500, weights each stock according to its market cap. The weights and which stocks have the most prominent role in the index is kind of decided by the overall wisdom of the market. This is a good visualization of the S&P 500. The size of each square represents the size of the company's total market capitalization. Bigger market capitalization, the bigger weight the stock has in the S&P 500 index. So this is the S&P 500, and these are the stocks in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It might not be a great representation of the overall stock market. Remember that the boxes here are still scaled by market cap, but if we instead were to scale by stock price, it would look something like this. Splitting the total US stock market capitalization into sectors, we can see that almost a third is in the technology sector. And this is also reflected in large cap indices like like the S&P 500. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, on the other hand, has financials and healthcare at the top. This is because United Health Group and Goldman Sachs has the highest stock prices. Since S&P 500 is very top-heavy in technology stocks, it might be informative to look at other indices. Now, this is true and I agree with this, but the Dow Jones Industrial Average is not the one. If you want to look at stocks with a smaller market cap, you could look at the Russell 2000 or the S&P 600 small cap. And you also have the S&P 500 equal weighted that weights each stock equally. But since the news media keeps bringing up the Dow Jones Industrial Average, it gives the impression that it is a reflection of the stock market. But it's not a good one. And as we've talked about, it's somewhat misleading since the shares with the highest stock price will have the biggest impact, regardless of the market capitalization. And you only select 30 stocks, thereby you're gonna miss a lot of important stocks and industries. Also, the amount of coverage that the Dow Jones Industrial Average gets from the news media is very disproportionate to the number of dollars that are invested in products that are linked to the index. Dow Jones Industrial Average is at 100 billion. And for comparison, there's like 100 stocks that has a higher market capitalization than that total investment in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. So if the news media is covering the Dow Jones because people are invested in it, you might as well cover and quote all of these stocks as well. Now, the argument for keeping the Dow Jones Industrial Average in the loop is mostly historical. We have an index that goes back all the way to the end of the 1800s that we can track and compare to levels today. Now, that's interesting, but it's not interesting enough to have the news media comment on it every single day. Just to illustrate this, okay?
Dow Jones Industrial Average added nearly 140 points, or about a third of 1%.
That's like 5 seconds, and that means that's almost 21 minutes a year, which you could instead have spent watching my videos. Speaking of which, please sure to make a like and subscribe if you haven't done so, and I'll see you in the next one.
Thing sucks. In 5, 4, 3. That's tomorrow, and that is it for us today.